DevilNeverCry.
What is up everyone, it is me DevilNeverCry, and in today's video I have the pleasure of providing a review for Sea of Stars, a retro-inspired turn-based RPG made by indie developers Sabotage Studio. Sea of Stars initially came up upon my radar after hearing good word of mouth about the game thanks to the demo that dropped just over a month ago. Having not had the time initially to play the demo itself, I eagerly put the game on my to-play list and waited for its release. And now that that time is upon us and I have had the pleasure of playing and beating this game, let's talk about what exactly it is and my impressions in a spoiler-free format. Starting with the overall story and premise, what exactly is Sea of Stars? As mentioned, Sea of Stars is a turn-based RPG that harkens back to the games of the 90s. Not just in its fantastic pixel art style, which looks amazing by the way, mainly thanks to the great animation work that helps a lot of these details pop, but also because of its structure. Naturally, you find yourself traversing towns, dungeons, and different locales, but when it comes to transitioning between each of these different areas, the game shifts to an overworld view where you're able to, quite literally in a matter of seconds, go from location to location. The story itself is fairly straightforward, but nevertheless just as impactful. You follow two protagonists initially, Zale and Valere, fated children of Solstice that are destined to cleanse or save the world from the corruption of the Fleshmancer. With the weight of the world essentially falling upon the shoulders of these two protagonists, the story in itself is grand already from the get-go. But it does have its own twists and turns that are sure to keep you on your toes, and ultimately the story mainly works because the characters themselves are likable. Beyond that, it also helps that the game actually manages to sidestep a major pitfall when it comes to most RPGs, and that is a slow opening. Unlike many other classic and contemporary RPGs, Sea of Stars actually lets you dive straight into the heart of the matter pretty much just after an hour of setting the stage, so to speak, which ultimately feels like a breath of fresh air, and I'm sure on repeat playthroughs is going to be an absolute godsend. Special mention also goes out to the composers for Sea of Stars, as I thought they absolutely nailed it with the soundtrack. Whether it was somber notes that drew you deeper still into a melancholic moment in the story, or even the fast and frenetic melodies that played whenever combat was ensuing, it certainly was a highlight for me personally, at least one that was worth mentioning. Shifting back to the gameplay, however, I think one of the strengths of Sea of Stars is how the game attempts to keep you engaged throughout the entirety of your playthrough. Beyond the fantastic art design itself, the level design does a very simple thing that is quite effective that keeps the player engaged, and that is the requirement for actual player input to traverse the world itself. Zale and Valere will constantly run into things in the world that they'll need to interact with, whether it's jumping a gap, shimmying across a ledge, climbing a wall, climbing a ladder, and even swimming. To perform all of these very basic actions, it requires the player to press a simple button. Don't get me wrong, this isn't necessarily revolutionary or reinventing the wheel, but in a contemporary age where modern games are essentially streamlining games and removing player input to help things flow in an attempt to create some sort of narrative experience, it makes for a nice change, and more importantly, consistently keeps the player engaged and has them thinking about the level structure itself, whether there's any verticality to a level or whether there's any secrets hiding just around the corner. And this level of engagement doesn't just stop with traversal, it actually spills over into the combat itself, which is another portion of Sea of Stars that is definitely worth discussing. Enemies are directly displayed to scale whenever you're in an open field or a dungeon or pretty much anywhere that isn't a town, essentially allowing players to effectively prepare in most cases for an upcoming battle, whereby touching or attacking an enemy will put you immediately into combat. This game is turn-based in the literal sense. There is no active time bar, there's nothing forcing a player to make a move, allowing you to effectively strategize for however long you want before putting your plans into action. Enemies in all cases will also display a counter above them to let you know how close they are to pulling off their own attack. Where the combat itself truly shines in my opinion is with the timing mechanic that's introduced early on in the game. Whenever the player physically attacks an enemy, by timing a button input just as the attack connects with the enemy, you're able to deal out extra damage. And on the other side of that spectrum, whenever the player incurs damage from an enemy, whenever that enemy's attack lands, if you press the same button, you're able to mitigate the amount of damage that the enemy does. Think of it as a natural evolution to Final Fantasy VIII's Gunblade system, where you were able to augment Squall's damage. I'm sure there's other examples out there I could have used, but that was the one that sprung to mind for me. The game goes to great lengths to let you know that this timing system is not paramount to essentially winning, it's simply just a bonus as opposed to it being a focus, but I feel it's a cool way to keep players engaged throughout a turn-based battle, as opposed to just setting their action and simply waiting for it to happen. It also allows for a greater sense of progression once you start to learn the timing of your own attacks as well as an enemy's attacks, allowing for a very cathartic feeling, particularly when you're able to block a multi-hitting attack. The game also features an interruption system, where you're able to stop enemies from pulling off their own attacks, provided you hit them with specific weaknesses. A combo system, where players are able to use multiple members of their party to pull off particular attacks, when they essentially have enough combo points, which can be gathered by simply pulling off different timed attacks, as well as interrupting enemies. And a live mana system, in which you're able to absorb magic from fallen enemies that will then go on to allow you to boost or effectively enhance different actions in battle, such as attacking or even healing. Needless to say, there is a lot to think about and do in the combat of Sea of Stars, and the system was deep enough, for me at least, to not be bored of it by the time I got to the end of the game. Moving away from combat entirely, this is an RPG, so let's briefly go over what other RPG systems Sea of Stars holds. To no one's surprise, the game features the standard EXP or experience point system, in which after defeating enemies, you gain experience. Once you meet a certain threshold of experience necessary, you gain a level. Whenever a member of your party gains a level, they'll receive a standard statistic boost across the board. However, Sea of Stars actually lets you boost a specific statistic and gives you a choice every time you level up, allowing you a little bit of leeway in specific playstyle and how you want your party members to grow. It's also worth mentioning that by leveling up, you're also able to unlock new skills to use in battle. The game also features a very straightforward gear system, where you're able to equip a weapon and a piece of defensive gear, alongside 3 different accessories. For those entirely unfamiliar with an RPG genre, or perhaps maybe those who are just struggling with the game and its combat, you're able to take advantage of the relic system, in which you're able to make use of different relics that can help aid you in battle. Right off the bat, very early on in the game, it actually gives you a relic that provides a boost to your health and the ability to regenerate all of your health and MP after you finish a battle. It even gives you a relic that gives you a visual audio cue to let you know that you've performed a timed input correctly. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Sea of Stars. I found it to be quirky, full of charm, and just ultimately a well-rounded RPG through and through. If you're a fan of RPGs, I'd say that Sea of Stars is certainly a must-play. And for those of you who like the look and premise of the game, but have never played an RPG, or perhaps it's not your forte, I still recommend checking out Sea of Stars. If you found today's review helpful, leave a like and subscribe, as there's more reviews on the way. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.